Sometimes the coldest water holds the hottest secrets. England, 1809. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the valley where the River Avon wound through Derbyshire countryside, its waters still swollen with spring melt. Nathaniel Granville, Duke of Ravenwood, guided his stallion along the muddy embankment, his thoughts distant and troubled as they had been for the 6 months since his return from Scotland. At 31 years of age, he had managed estates across 3 countries, negotiated with Parliament, and commanded the respect of the most powerful men in England. Yet he could not manage the growing unease that had settled in his chest since coming home to find his younger brother buried, and his tenants speaking in hushed, uncomfortable tones whenever Philip's name arose. The horse's ears flicked forward suddenly, and Nathaniel's attention snapped to the present. Through the sound of rushing water came something else. A cry, sharp and desperate, quickly cut off. He urged his mount forward, scanning the riverbank with practiced urgency. There, perhaps 50 yards downstream, where the current narrowed between 2 rocky outcroppings, he saw the pale flutter of fabric beneath the surface, a figure struggling weakly against the pull of the water. Nathaniel did not hesitate. He threw himself from the saddle and plunged down the embankment, his boots sliding in the wet grass. The water was shockingly cold when he crashed into it, stealing his breath, but he pushed through the current toward the drowning woman. She had stopped struggling, her body limp as the river dragged her toward the deeper channel. He caught her arm, then wrapped his other arm around her waist, pulling her against his chest as he fought his way back toward the shallows. When his feet finally found purchase on the rocky bottom, Nathaniel hauled them both onto the bank, laying the woman on her back in the grass. She was young, perhaps 23, with golden hair plastered to her skull, and skin so pale it appeared translucent. He turned her onto her side, and water spilled from her mouth. For a terrible moment she did not breathe, and then she convulsed, coughing violently as her body expelled the river from her lungs. It was then, as Nathaniel knelt beside her in the fading sunlight, that he noticed what the water had revealed. Her dress, white muslin now rendered nearly transparent by its sodden state, clung to her form so completely that he could see through to the skin beneath. And there, across her back and shoulders, were marks. Not shadows, not tricks of the light, but scars, dozens of them, crossing her flesh in patterns that spoke of deliberate cruelty. Long, thin lines that could only have come from a whip. Circular burns that suggested something heated and pressed to bare skin, recent enough that the tissue was still raised and angry, old enough that they had healed into permanent testimony. Nathaniel felt bile rise in his throat. He had seen men flogged in the military, had witnessed the aftermath of violence in his travels. But this was different. This had been done to a gentlewoman, done methodically and repeatedly over a span of months if the varying ages of the wounds were any indication. The woman's eyes flew open, blue as the winter sky, wide with terror. She saw him leaning over her and screamed, a sound of such pure panic that it seemed to tear from somewhere deep in her soul. She tried to scramble backward, but her limbs would not obey her, weakened by the cold water and lack of air. "No," she gasped, the word barely audible through her chattering teeth. "No, please, Philip, I cannot any more, please." The name struck Nathaniel with the force of a physical blow. His brother's name. On this woman's lips, spoken with a fear so profound it was almost worship in its intensity. "I am not Philip," he said quickly, keeping his voice low and steady despite the ice that had formed in his veins. "Philip is dead. I am his brother, Nathaniel Granville, the Duke of Ravenwood." The woman's eyes focused on his face for the first time, studying his features with desperate attention. Recognition dawned slowly, followed by something that might have been relief, or might have been fresh horror. She turned her face away, a sob catching in her throat. "Your Grace," she whispered, the formal address sounding wrong in her trembling voice, too practiced, too automatic, as though beaten into her along with God knew what else. "Forgive me. I did not mean to trouble you. Please leave me here. Please." But Nathaniel was already shrugging out of his riding coat, sodden though it was, and draping it around her shoulders. The motion made her flinch, and he noticed how she tried to make herself smaller, curling inward as though to protect organs that had learned to expect blows. "You are freezing," he said, forcing gentleness into his tone despite the rage building in his chest. "I must get you somewhere warm, or you will die of exposure." "Then let me die," she replied, so quietly he almost missed it. Nathaniel's hands stilled. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time beyond the immediate crisis. Her face was lovely despite its current pallor, with fine bones and a mouth that might have smiled often in a different life. But it was her eyes that arrested him, eyes that held the particular emptiness of someone who had already died inside and was simply waiting for the body to catch up. He shifted his gaze to the riverbank behind her, and his stomach clenched. The stones there were not scattered naturally. They had been arranged in a neat pile, each one smooth and heavy. Beside them, tangled in the grass, was a length of rope still wet from the water, and when he looked more closely at the woman's skirt, he could see where something heavy had been tied to the fabric, the weight that would have pulled her down and held her under. This had not been an accident. This had been deliberate. "You tried to drown yourself," he said, the words flat with shock. The woman closed her eyes. "Yes. Why?" A bitter laugh escaped her, sharp and broken. "Because some sins are too deep to wash away, Your Grace, but water can still claim sinners." "What sin could possibly warrant such a sentence?" Nathaniel demanded. "You cannot be more than 23. What could you have done?" "I survived," she whispered. "That is sin enough." Before he could respond, before he could make sense of words that made no sense at all, she tried once more to pull away from him. But her strength was spent, and when she attempted to rise, her legs buckled beneath her. Nathaniel caught her before she could fall, and she made a sound, low and wounded, when his hand inadvertently brushed against her back where the scars lay thick beneath the wet fabric. "I am sorry," he said immediately. "I will not hurt you." She laughed again, that same broken sound. "All men hurt, Your Grace. It is their nature." "Not all men," Nathaniel replied, though even as he said it, he wondered if she had any reason left to believe such a thing. He looked around, assessing their situation. The sun was sinking lower, and the March air held a bite that would turn deadly once darkness fell. The woman was already shaking uncontrollably, her lips taking on a blue tinge that spoke of advancing hypothermia. Ravenwood Manor was less than 2 miles distant, close enough to reach before she succumbed to the cold if he moved quickly. "I am going to carry you to my home," he told her, making his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "You need warmth, dry clothing, and medical attention." "No," she said, and there was desperation in the word now, a frantic edge that suggested she feared his house more than she feared death itself. "Please, Your Grace, I beg you, do not take me there. Let me go. Let me disappear. No one will miss me. No one will mourn. I would mourn," Nathaniel said, surprising himself with the truth of it. "I would mourn that I saved a life only to let it slip away through my fingers. You do not know me." "No," he agreed, "but I know my brother's name on your lips, and I know the marks on your back, and I know that whatever happened to you, whatever drove you into that river, it has something to do with Philip Granville, and that makes it my responsibility to understand." The woman stared at him, something that might have been hope flickering in her dead eyes before it was ruthlessly suppressed. "He told me about you," she said softly. "Your brother. He said you were in Scotland. He said you would never return. He was wrong," Nathaniel replied. "I came home 6 months ago. Too late," she whispered. "Too late for all of us." Before she could protest further, before she could beg him again to leave her to die in the grass by the river that had failed to claim her, Nathaniel gathered her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, lighter than she should have been, as though pieces of her had been carved away along with her will to live. She did not fight him. Perhaps she had no fight left. She simply turned her face into his chest and began to cry, silent tears that soaked into his wet shirt, tears that seemed to come from a well so deep it might never run dry. Nathaniel whistled for his horse, which had wandered a short distance downstream to crop at the grass. The animal came obediently, and Nathaniel managed to mount while still holding the woman, settling her across his lap. She continued to cry without sound, her body shaking with sobs that she tried desperately to suppress, as though even grief was something she had been taught to hide. As they rode toward Ravenwood Manor, the sun sinking behind them and shadows lengthening across the valley, Nathaniel felt the weight of something shifting in his world, He had returned to England seeking answers about his brother's final months, seeking to understand the whispers and averted eyes that greeted him in every village and tenant cottage. Now, holding this broken woman who had tried to drown herself rather than face another day, who bore Philip's sins written in scars across her flesh, he realized that the answers he found might destroy everything he thought he knew about his family, his name, and the brother he had mourned. The woman in his arms stirred slightly, and through her tears, she whispered words so quiet he almost missed them. "He was a monster, Your Grace. Your brother was a monster, and I am proof of it." Nathaniel's arms tightened around her, protective and furious in equal measure. "Then I will be proof of something better," he replied. "I swear it." She did not respond. She simply continued to cry as Ravenwood Manor appeared on the horizon, its gray stone walls catching the last rays of sunlight. The home that had sheltered a predator for over a year now opening its doors to one of his victims. Neither of them knew yet what would follow from this moment, what truths would unravel, and what consequences would cascade from the simple act of pulling a drowning woman from a river. They knew only that something had begun, something that could not be undone. And in the gathering dusk, as the first stars appeared above Derbyshire, the River Avon continued its eternal journey toward the sea, indifferent to the secrets it had almost kept, and the lives it had almost claimed. The morning following the rescue dawned gray and heavy with rain. Nathaniel Granville stood at the window of his private study, watching water stream down the diamond-paned glass, and wondered if he had saved a life or merely postponed a death. The woman he had pulled from the River Avon lay unconscious in the Rose Room, attended by Mrs. Agnes Fletcher, Ravenwood's formidable housekeeper, and Dr. Edmund Hartwell, who had arrived within an hour of Nathaniel's urgent summons the previous evening. When they had first carried the woman into the manor, dripping river water onto the marble floors of the entrance hall, Mrs. Fletcher had taken one look at her sodden state and her employer's grim expression, and asked no questions. She had simply nodded, summoned 2 housemaids, and disappeared up the main staircase with the woman in her arms, as though rescuing half-drowned strangers was a regular occurrence at Ravenwood. Dr. Hartwell had been less circumspect. After his initial examination, he had descended to Nathaniel's study with his medical bag clutched in white-knuckled hands and his usual professional composure badly shaken. "The hypothermia is concerning but manageable," he had said, accepting the brandy Nathaniel offered him with hands that trembled slightly. "Her lungs took in water, but not enough to cause lasting damage if we can keep fever at bay. However, Your Grace, the other injuries—" "I saw them," Nathaniel had interrupted, his voice hard. "Did you?" Dr. Hartwell had taken a long drink before continuing. "Then you saw that they were inflicted over an extended period. Months, perhaps more than a year. The patterns suggest systematic abuse, whipping, burning, possibly other methods I cannot identify from scarring alone. Whoever did this to her did so repeatedly and with deliberation. My brother," Nathaniel had said flatly, watching the doctor's face pale further. "I believe my brother did this." Now, 3 days later, the woman still had not spoken. She lay in the Rose Room's 4-poster bed, her golden hair spread across the pillows like a saint in a church painting, her eyes open but focused on something no one else could see. Mrs. Fletcher reported that she took broth when offered, allowed herself to be tended, but responded to no questions and made no requests. She simply existed in a state of wakeful silence that was somehow more disturbing than unconsciousness would have been. Nathaniel had spent those 3 days investigating. He had sent his most trusted footman, young Thomas Marsh, to Somerset, with instructions to learn everything possible about the woman without drawing attention to his inquiries. Thomas had returned that morning with a tale that made Nathaniel's blood run cold. Lady Vivian Hartley, Thomas had reported, standing in the study with his cap clutched in nervous hands, daughter of Viscount Hartley, who died 2 years past. The family lost everything, Your Grace. Bad investments in shipping ventures that never materialized, gambling debts the Viscount could not cover. When he died, there was nothing left but debt. The estate was sold to satisfy creditors. Lady Vivian went to live with her mother's sister, Lady Gwendolen Fairmont, as a companion. "How long has she been with Lady Gwendolen?" Nathaniel had asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. 22 months, Your Grace. She arrived in the summer of 1807. 22 months. And Philip had died 8 months ago, in July of 1808. which meant he had been visiting the Fairmont estate for 14 months before his death. 14 months of access to a young woman rendered vulnerable by her family's ruin, dependent on a relative's charity, with no resources and nowhere else to turn. Nathaniel had dismissed Thomas with thanks, and a purse heavy enough to ensure his discretion. Then he had begun a different sort of investigation, one that took him into the sealed rooms of Ravenwood, where Philip's belongings remained untouched since his death. His brother's chambers were on the second floor, overlooking the gardens that their mother had loved. Nathaniel had not entered them since returning from Scotland. He had told himself it was respect for the dead, a reluctance to disturb the space where Philip had lived his final days. Now he recognized it for what it truly was: cowardice. Some part of him had sensed that answers waited in these rooms, and he had not wanted to find them. The sitting room revealed nothing unusual at first glance. Books on the shelves, correspondence on the writing desk, riding clothes in the wardrobe. The trappings of a gentleman's life, unremarkable and ordinary. But when Nathaniel began examining the books more closely, pulling them from the shelves and checking behind them, he found the first of the hidden volumes tucked behind a row of agricultural treatises that Philip had almost certainly never read. The journal was small, bound in brown leather, and filled with his brother's familiar handwriting. Nathaniel carried it to the window seat and began to read, and with each page, his horror grew. The entries were not dated in any systematic way, but they spanned what appeared to be several years. They detailed Philip's pursuits, though that word was far too gentle for what the pages described. Conquests, he called them. Projects. Women from families that had fallen on hard times, who needed help, who were vulnerable, and therefore, in Philip's twisted logic, available. The key, one entry read in his brother's neat script, is to find those who are already broken by circumstance. They require less breaking afterward. The daughter of a bankrupt baron makes a far more interesting subject than some fresh debutante who still believes the world is kind. Nathaniel's hands shook as he turned the pages, reading descriptions of manipulation, of calculated cruelty disguised as assistance, of systematic destruction disguised as affection. And there, scattered throughout, were references to women identified only by initials: Miss C.H., Miss J.M., Miss L.P., and most frequently in the later entries, Lady H., who had the most remarkable pride for someone in such diminished circumstances. Lady H., who required more persuasion than the others, but ultimately proved most satisfying to reduce. Lady H., whose screams have a musical quality that quite enchants me. The journal slipped from Nathaniel's fingers and fell to the floor. He stood abruptly, crossed to the wash basin, and was violently sick. When his stomach was empty and his hands had stopped shaking enough to function, he retrieved the journal and continued searching the rooms. He found 2 more hidden volumes, each more damning than the last, each documenting his brother's systematic abuse of women who had no power to resist him and no recourse to justice. The final entry in the most recent journal was dated 3 days before Philip's death. Lady H. grows tiresome in her compliance, it read. The fun is in the breaking, not in what remains after. I think I shall abandon this project soon and seek fresher game. The aunt has served her purpose, and the girl has nothing left that interests me. Nathaniel carried all 3 journals down to his study and locked them in his desk drawer. Then he sat in his chair and stared at nothing, trying to reconcile the brother he had thought he knew with the monster these pages revealed. Philip had been charming, popular, always surrounded by friends and admirers. How had no one seen? How had Nathaniel himself seen nothing? Because you were in Scotland. A bitter voice in his mind supplied. You were managing estates and negotiating contracts and congratulating yourself on being a responsible duke, while your brother destroyed lives and called it entertainment. A knock at the door interrupted his spiral of self-recrimination. Mrs. Fletcher entered without waiting for acknowledgement, her usually composed face showing signs of strain. Your Grace, she said urgently. You must come. She tried to climb out the window. I stopped her, but she will not calm. She is asking for you. Nathaniel followed Mrs. Fletcher up the stairs at a run. When they reached the Rose Room, he found Lady Vivian standing by the window in her borrowed nightdress, her bare feet leaving wet prints on the carpet from the rain that had blown in through the open casement. 2 housemaids stood nearby, uncertain and frightened. while Dr. Hartwell spoke in low, soothing tones that the woman clearly did not hear. "Lady Vivian," Nathaniel said from the doorway. Her head turned toward him, and for the first time since the river, her eyes focused with full awareness on his face. "I must leave," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. "I have brought shame to your house by my presence. I must go before anyone discovers I am here." "You will go nowhere in this condition," Nathaniel replied, keeping his voice steady. "You have pneumonia threatening, you can barely stand, and there is a storm outside that would kill you within an hour." "Then I shall die," she said simply. "It is better than the alternative." "And what alternative is that?" Something broke in her expression, a wall crumbling after too many assaults. "The alternative where you discover what I am, what your brother made me. And then you look at me the way you are looking at me now, with pity and disgust, and I must live with that look in your eyes every day until I find another river to accomplish what the Avon could not." Nathaniel dismissed the servants with a gesture, including Mrs. Fletcher, though the housekeeper left with obvious reluctance. When the door closed behind them, he took a step into the room but came no closer, giving Lady Vivian the space she clearly needed. "I know what my brother was," he said quietly. "I have been reading his journals this afternoon. I know what he did to you." The color drained from her face until she swayed where she stood. Nathaniel moved instinctively to steady her, but she held up a hand to stop him. "Then you know I am ruined," she whispered. "You know I am worthless, used, damaged beyond any redemption. You know that I am a stain upon your family name simply by existing within your walls." "I know," Nathaniel said, choosing each word with care. "That my brother was a monster who preyed upon women he believed powerless to resist him. I know that you were his victim, not his accomplice. And I know that any shame in this situation belongs to the perpetrator, not to those he harmed." Lady Vivian stared at him, as though he had begun speaking a foreign language. "That is not how the world works, Your Grace. You know it is not. If this becomes known, if anyone discovers what transpired between Philip Granville and myself, society will call me seductress, opportunist, willing participant in my own destruction. No one will ask if I consented. No one will care that I had no choice." "Then we will not tell society," Nathaniel replied. "Not yet. Not until you are stronger." He had given her his word that he would not drag her name before society, that he would not make a spectacle of her suffering for the sake of his own conscience. Privately confronting her aunt with the journals was not the same as parading them through every drawing room in London, he told himself. If he could frighten Lady Gwendolen into compliance without a public scandal, then perhaps he could keep his promise to Vivian and still secure her freedom. "I will never be stronger," she said, but her voice broke on the words. "He broke something in me, Your Grace. Something that cannot be repaired. I am a cracked vessel that will never again hold water." Nathaniel took a risk and moved closer, slowly enough that she could retreat if she wished. She did not. He stopped an arm's length away, close enough to speak softly but not so close as to threaten. "Tell me," he said. "Tell me what happened. All of it. I have read his version, twisted and vile as it is. Now I would hear yours." For a long moment, Lady Vivian said nothing. Then, as though a dam had finally burst, the words came pouring out. She told him about arriving at her aunt's estate, destitute and desperate, grateful for any roof over her head. She told him about Philip's first visit. How charming he had been. How kind. How interested in her botanical studies and her thoughts on literature. She told him about how slowly, subtly, that kindness had shifted into something else. How he had begun mentioning her father's debts that had followed her even into death. How he had offered to help. If she would only be reasonable, only be grateful, only understand that he required certain considerations in exchange for his generosity. She told him about the first time he had hurt her, how shocked she had been, how she had tried to refuse. She told him about how he had shown her the papers then, documents proving that her father's creditors could still seize what little she had left, could still pursue her for debts she could never repay, could have her thrown into debtor's prison if they chose. She told him about her aunt, Lady Gwendolen, who had known everything, who had heard everything through the thin walls of the manor house, and who had done nothing except collect the money Philip paid her for the privilege of access to her niece. And she told him about the 14 months that followed, months of systematic cruelty disguised as affection, of abuse that escalated each time Philip grew bored with previous methods, of a nightmare that had no escape because she had nowhere else to go, and no one who would believe her if she tried to speak. When he died, she finished, her voice nearly inaudible. I thought it was over. I thought I could finally breathe. But the debts remained, and my aunt immediately began seeking another solution. She found Mr. Davenport, a merchant twice my age, who needs a wife to care for his household and produce heirs. She has already signed the contract on my behalf. The wedding approaches, and I could not face it. I could not survive it. So I chose the river. She met Nathaniel's eyes then, and he saw in them a desperation that cut him to his soul. Now you know everything, she said. Now you understand why I must leave. Your household deserves better than to be tainted by my presence. Nathaniel felt rage building in his chest. Rage at his brother. Rage at Lady Gwendolen. Rage at a world that would blame this woman for what had been done to her. But he forced it down. Forced his voice to remain calm and gentle. You will stay here, he said. You will stay until you are well. And then you will stay until we determine what is to be done about your situation. My household is already tainted by my brother's sins. Your presence here does not add to that stain. If anything, it begins to balance the scales. Your Grace— Nathaniel, he interrupted, if we are to speak plainly about such matters, we shall use given names. I am Nathaniel to those I respect, and I respect your survival, Lady Vivian. Vivian, she whispered, the name strange on her own lips after so long being called nothing but girl, creature, Lady H, or worse. If I am to call you Nathaniel, then I am Vivian. Very well, Vivian. Will you allow Mrs. Fletcher to help you back to bed? You are swaying on your feet, and I would rather not need to catch you when you fall. To his surprise, she laughed, though it was a broken, rusty sound. How practical you are, Your Grace. Nathaniel. How unlike your brother. I will take that as the highest compliment imaginable, he replied, this time when Mrs. Fletcher entered at his summons. Vivian allowed herself to be guided back to the bed without protest. But as Nathaniel turned to leave, her voice stopped him at the door. He kept journals? She asked. Philip? Nathaniel turned back. He did. May I read them? The parts about me? Why would you wish to do such a thing? Vivian's expression was difficult to read. Because I need to know if I remember correctly. I need to know if it was as bad as I think it was, or if I exaggerated it in my mind, made it worse than reality, made myself into a victim when I should have been stronger. Nathaniel crossed back to the bed and looked down at her, this woman who had survived what would have destroyed most people, who was still questioning whether her memories of torture were accurate or somehow inflated. It was worse, he said gently. His accounts, vile as they are, reveal systematic cruelty that you have almost certainly softened in your own recollection, because the full truth would be unbearable. You were not weak. You survived. That makes you one of the strongest people I have ever met. Tears spilled down Vivian's cheeks, but she did not look away. Thank you, she whispered. No one has ever said that to me before. As Nathaniel left the rose room and descended once more to his study, he understood that something had shifted. 3 days ago, he had pulled a drowning woman from a river. Now he had heard her story, understood her pain, and made her a promise. He did not yet know how he would keep that promise, how he would protect her from her aunt and the merchant and society's cruelty. But he would find a way. He owed her that much. He owed all of Philip's victims that much. And perhaps, if he succeeded, he could begin to balance the scales his brother had so thoroughly unbalanced. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing clean nothing but continuing, nonetheless, persistent and patient as time itself. The week that followed brought a deceptive calm to Ravenwood Manor, the sort of stillness that precedes a storm. Vivian remained in the rose room, growing stronger each day under Mrs. Fletcher's watchful care, though her spirit remained as fragile as spun glass. Nathaniel found himself drawn to her door far more often than propriety would suggest, standing in the corridor and listening to the sound of her moving about, reassuring himself that she had not found another window to climb through, another way to disappear. On the 8th morning after the rescue, Dr. Hartwell pronounced Vivian recovered enough to leave her bed for short periods. Nathaniel seized the opportunity to invite her to join him in the conservatory, a glass-walled room at the south end of the manor, where his mother had once cultivated exotic plants. The space had fallen into neglect in the years since her death, but the structure remained sound, and sunlight still streamed through the windows to warm the air within. Vivienne appeared at the appointed hour dressed in a simple morning gown that Mrs. Fletcher had altered to fit her slight frame. Her golden hair was arranged in a modest style that revealed the pale column of her neck, and though she moved with obvious care, favoring her left side where the bruises from her struggle in the river had darkened to deep purple, she held her head high. Nathaniel found himself oddly moved by the sight of her trying to maintain dignity, despite everything that had been done to strip it away. "Thank you for coming," he said, offering his arm to guide her through the manor. She hesitated before accepting, her gloved hand resting so lightly on his sleeve that he could barely feel the contact. "I thought you might appreciate seeing something other than the walls of your chamber." "You are very kind, Your Grace," Vivienne replied, the formal address creating distance between them despite their proximity, "though I fear I have already imposed upon your hospitality far longer than appropriate." "Nathaniel," he reminded her gently as they walked, "and you have imposed upon nothing. This house is large enough to accommodate a guest for as long as necessary." The conservatory was warm despite the March chill outside, heated by the sun and the memories of better days. Vivienne's eyes widened as they entered, her gaze traveling across the rows of empty planters and abandoned workbenches. "Your mother was a botanist," she said, and it was not a question. "How did you know?" "The arrangement of the space. The tools still organized by function rather than decoration. This was a place of serious study, not casual hobby." Vivienne moved closer to one of the workbenches, running her fingers along the weathered wood. "I had a space like this once, in my father's house." Before everything fell apart, Nathaniel watched her face transform as she spoke, saw the ghost of who she had been before Philip destroyed her. "You mentioned your interest in botanical studies. What did you research?" "Medicinal properties of common plants." Her voice grew stronger, more animated. "My father thought it frivolous at first, but when I managed to develop a tincture that helped his gout, he became my greatest advocate. He was going to fund a proper laboratory, and then the investments failed, and there was no money for laboratories or anything else. If you wished," Nathaniel said carefully, "you could use this space. The tools are old, but serviceable. I could have the gardeners bring specimens from the grounds." Vivienne turned to look at him, and for the first time since he had pulled her from the river, he saw something other than pain in her eyes. Hope flickered there, tentative and fragile, before she deliberately crushed it. "That would not be appropriate, Your Grace. Nathaniel, I cannot remain here long enough to justify such an undertaking." "Why not?" She stared at him, as though he had asked why water was wet. "Because I am a woman of no means living unchaperoned in the home of an unmarried gentleman. Because every day I remain here adds to the scandal that will inevitably follow when my presence becomes known. Because I have brought shame enough to your house without compounding it further." Nathaniel moved closer, close enough to see the fine tremor in her hands that she tried to hide by clasping them together. "What if I told you that I care nothing for what scandal-mongers might say? That I would rather face whispers than know I had turned away someone who needed help?" "Then I would say you are foolish," Vivienne replied. But there was no heat in the words, only exhaustion. "You have a position to maintain, responsibilities to your tenants and your name. You cannot afford to be associated with someone like me. Someone like you," Nathaniel repeated, allowing a hint of anger to color his tone. "You mean someone who was victimized by my brother? Someone who suffered because my family's name gave him the power to destroy lives without consequence?" Vivienne flinched as though struck. "I mean someone who will be called whore and opportunist the moment society learns where I have been and what has been done to me. Do not pretend you do not understand how this works. You are a duke. You can survive scandal. I am the daughter of a bankrupt viscount. Scandal will destroy me." "It will not come to that," Nathaniel insisted. "I have a proposal that might solve your immediate difficulties." Vivienne's expression hardened with suspicion. "What sort of proposal?" "Your aunt forces this marriage to Mr. Davenport because of debts, yes? Obligations that must be satisfied? Yes. My father's creditors have been patient, but their patience has limits. Lady Gwendolen has already signed the contract with Mr. Davenport. He has paid a substantial sum to clear the most pressing debts in exchange for my hand. Nathaniel began to pace the length of the conservatory, his mind working through possibilities. What if I were to approach your aunt with an alternative arrangement? I could pay off all remaining obligations in exchange for releasing you from this contract. Vivian's laugh was bitter and broken. You think my aunt cares about money more than control? You do not know her. Then help me understand, Nathaniel said, stopping to face her directly. Explain to me why a woman would force her niece into a marriage with a man old enough to be her father when another solution presents itself. For a long moment, Vivian said nothing. Then she moved to the window, looking out at the grounds where early spring flowers were beginning to push through the soil. Because she hates me, she said finally, her voice barely audible. She hated my mother for marrying above her station, for becoming a viscountess when Lady Gwendolen remained trapped in a loveless marriage to a minor baron. When my father died and I came to her penniless, she saw an opportunity for revenge. Every humiliation I suffer is a victory for her. Philip understood that. It is why she gave him access. It is why she will never let me go willingly. Nathaniel felt cold fury settle in his chest. Nevertheless, I must try. Will you at least allow me to make the attempt? Vivian turned from the window, and the hope that had flickered earlier returned. Stronger this time despite her obvious efforts to suppress it. If you wish to waste your time and money, I cannot stop you. But do not expect gratitude when you fail. I will settle for hope, Nathaniel replied. Even reluctant hope is better than the alternative. The journey to Lady Gwendolen's estate took the better part of a day. Nathaniel traveled alone, leaving instructions with Mrs. Fletcher to keep Vivian safe, and more importantly, to prevent her from leaving while he was absent. The Fairmont Manor was smaller than Ravenwood, but well maintained, speaking of money carefully managed, if not abundant. A footman answered his knock and led him to a drawing room where Lady Gwendolen waited, clearly having been warned of his approach. She was a woman in her early 50s, handsome rather than beautiful, with sharp eyes that assessed him with the precision of a merchant evaluating goods. Her gown was expensive, but several seasons out of fashion, and the jewels at her throat were real but modest. Everything about her spoke of someone clinging to respectability with both hands. Your Grace, she said, rising to curtsy with perfect correctness. What an unexpected honor. To what do I owe the pleasure of this visit? Nathaniel did not waste time with pleasantries. I have come to discuss your niece, Lady Vivian Hartley. Something flickered in Lady Gwendolen's eyes, quickly masked. Ah, yes. Poor Vivian. I understand she had some sort of accident near your property. How kind of you to see to her care. I trust she is recovered enough to return home? She will not be returning to your care, Nathaniel said flatly. Not now. And if I have my way, not ever. Lady Gwendolen's expression hardened. I am her legal guardian until she marries your Grace. Whatever romantic notions you may have developed, the law is quite clear. I have no romantic notions, Nathaniel replied, though something in his chest tightened as he said it, as though his heart disagreed with his words. I have, however, learned some disturbing facts about her treatment while under your roof, treatment that involved my late brother. For the first time, Lady Gwendolen looked uncertain. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. I mean that Philip kept journals, very detailed journals that document his abuse of multiple young women, including your niece. Journals that also document payments made to you for allowing him continued access. The color drained from Lady Gwendolen's face. She sat down abruptly, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. Those are lies. They are written in his own hand, dated and specific. Nathaniel remained standing, using his height and position to emphasize the power imbalance between them. I have them secured at Ravenwood. They make for disturbing reading. Lady Gwendolen was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost its warmth. What do you want? I want you to release Lady Vivian from her engagement to Mr. Davenport. I will pay whatever sum is necessary to satisfy the contract and clear any remaining debts. In exchange, you will relinquish all claims on her person and her future. Lady Gwendolen laughed, a harsh sound that held no humor. You think it is that simple? You think you can buy her freedom with your ducal fortune and your self-righteous indignation? I think it is worth attempting. Then you are a fool, your Grace. Lady Gwendolen rose, moving to pour herself a glass of sherry with hands that trembled slightly. The contract with Mr. Davenport is legally binding. He has already paid a substantial advance. Breaking that contract would not only require returning his money, but would damage my reputation as someone who honors her commitments. In my financial position, reputation is everything. I will pay double what he gave you," Nathaniel countered. "Triple if necessary."
"It is not about the money," Lady Gwendolyn's composure cracked, revealing the venom beneath. "It is about teaching that girl her place. She is her mother's daughter, filled with the same pride, the same certainty that she deserves better than her station. I endured years of watching my sister lord her superior marriage over me. I will not watch the daughter do the same." Nathaniel stared at her, his disgust complete. "So you sold her to my brother, and when he died, you sold her again to a merchant old enough to be her grandfather. All to satisfy your petty jealousy. I provided for her when no one else would," Lady Gwendolyn hissed. "I gave her shelter and food. If the price for that charity was occasional discomfort, then she should have been grateful." "Discomfort," Nathaniel repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "You call systematic torture discomfort? I call it education. She learned what happens to women who think themselves above their circumstances. Now she will marry Mr. Davenport and learn to be a proper, obedient wife. And you, Your Grace, will forget this foolish crusade before you damage your own reputation beyond repair." Nathaniel turned toward the door, then paused. "If you believe I will abandon her, you understand nothing. I will find a way to free her from this contract with or without your cooperation." "Then you will fail," Lady Gwendolyn said with cold certainty. "And while you are failing, I will ensure that all of London knows that Vivian Hartley seduced both Granville brothers, that she manipulated your poor dead sibling into debauchery, and is now attempting the same with you. By the time I finish, her name will be so thoroughly ruined that even Mr. Davenport will withdraw his offer, and she will have nothing left but the gutter." Nathaniel met her gaze, seeing the malice there, the pleasure she took in her power over her niece. "Do your worst, madam. I assure you the journals I possess will make far more interesting reading than your lies." He left before she could respond, climbing into his carriage with Lady Gwendolyn's threats ringing in his ears. There was, of course, a more brutal solution. He could take Philip's journals to a magistrate, lay every sordid page before the law, and let the scandal consume whoever it would. Davenport would withdraw, Lady Gwendolyn would be disgraced, and the contract would crumble to ash. But the same fire that burned Vivian's aunt would burn Vivian, and every other woman named in those pages. Their suffering would become gossip, their pain a curiosity for bored society to pick over between courses at supper. Nathaniel could not bring himself to purchase justice with their further humiliation. As they pulled away from the estate, he realized that he had made the situation worse, not better. Within hours, if not minutes, Lady Gwendolyn would begin spreading her poison through society. And Vivian, still recovering at Ravenwood, would bear the consequences. The rumors reached Ravenwood before Nathaniel did. By the time his carriage pulled up to the manor the following afternoon, half the neighboring estates had already heard some version of Lady Gwendolyn's tale. The details varied, but the core remained consistent. Lady Vivian Hartley, disgraced daughter of a bankrupt viscount, had seduced Philip Granville and was now attempting to entrap his brother, the Duke. Mrs. Fletcher met him at the door, her expression grim. "The invitations have stopped arriving, Your Grace. 3 messengers came today with regrets for events you were expected to attend, and Lady Vivian has heard the whispers from the maids. She is packing her belongings." Nathaniel took the stairs 2 at a time. He found Vivian in the Rose Room, folding the few garments Mrs. Fletcher had provided into a small traveling bag. Her face was pale but composed, her movements methodical and deliberate. "You are not leaving," he said from the doorway. "I must," Vivian replied without looking up. "I have destroyed your reputation by my presence. The least I can do is remove the cause of scandal. The cause of scandal is my brother and your aunt, not you. Society will not see it that way." She finally met his eyes, and he saw resignation there, a return to the emptiness that had filled her when he first pulled her from the river. "They never do. I warned you this would happen. I told you that some things cannot be fixed with good intentions and ducal authority. Now you have lost your position in society, and I have gained nothing but the certainty that I should have let the river take me when it had the chance." Nathaniel crossed the room and took the garment from her hands, forcing her to stop packing and face him. "I have not given up. There must be another way."
There is no other way, Vivian said, and tears began to slip down her cheeks despite her obvious efforts to hold them back. The contract with Mr. Davenport is legal and binding. My aunt will never release me. And now she has ensured that even if by some miracle the contract were dissolved, no respectable person would ever acknowledge me again. I am ruined, utterly and completely. The only question that remains is whether I drag you down with me or spare you by leaving. You are not leaving, Nathaniel repeated, his hands tightening on her arms. I will not allow it. You cannot stop me, she whispered. You have no authority over me, no legal right to keep me here. And even if you did, what future could I possibly have? What life awaits me now except disgrace and isolation? Nathaniel released her and stepped back, his mind racing through possibilities and finding each one blocked by law, custom, and Lady Gwendolyn's malice. Vivian was right. There appeared to be no solution that would free her from the contract while preserving even a shred of her reputation. Unless an idea formed, terrible in its implications but possible in a way that nothing else was. He opened his mouth to speak, to propose the only solution he could see, then closed it again. Not yet. Not when she was already devastated. He needed time to think, to consider all the ramifications. Stay one more night, he said instead. Give me until tomorrow to find an answer. If by then I have nothing to offer, I will not stop you from leaving. Vivian studied his face for a long moment, searching for something he was not sure he could give. Finally, she nodded. One more night, but no longer. I will not watch you sacrifice everything for someone who can never be saved. As Nathaniel left the rose room and returned to his study, he knew that the next decision he made would change both their lives forever. The solution he was considering was drastic, possibly foolish, and would shock everyone who knew him. But as he thought about Vivian's empty eyes and Lady Gwendolyn's triumph, he realized that some prices were worth paying. The only question was whether Vivian would agree when the time came to make the offer. Outside, clouds were gathering on the horizon, dark and heavy with rain. Another storm was coming to Derbyshire. Nathaniel only hoped they would both survive it. The morning after Nathaniel's failed attempt to reason with Lady Gwendolyn, he found Vivian in the conservatory, standing motionless among the empty planters. She had not touched her breakfast, Mrs. Fletcher reported, and had been standing in that same spot for nearly an hour, staring at nothing. You cannot leave, Nathaniel said from the doorway, his voice carrying across the glass-walled space. Vivian did not turn. I have already decided. The carriage is being prepared. Then I will have the horses removed from their traces, Nathaniel replied, crossing to stand beside her. I will lock the doors and station footmen at every exit. I will do whatever is necessary to keep you safe. Safe, she repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. There is no safety for someone like me. Not in your house. Not anywhere. Lady Gwendolyn has won. The best I can hope for now is to minimize the damage to others. Nathaniel took a breath, steadying himself for what he needed to tell her. There are others. That made Vivian turn, confusion crossing her features. Others? Other women, Nathaniel said quietly. Other victims of my brother. I hired an investigator 2 days ago to look into Philip's movements during the years before his death. He found 3 young women from families similar to yours. Families that had suffered financial reversals and were struggling to maintain their positions. Philip visited all of them regularly. The color drained from Vivian's face. How many? 3 that we know of. Miss Caroline Hendricks, Miss Jane Morrison, and Miss Louisa Pemberley. There may be more that have not yet been identified. Vivian's legs seemed to give way beneath her. She reached for the workbench to steady herself, her breathing coming in short, sharp gasps. I thought it was only me. I thought there was something about me specifically that had drawn his attention, some flaw in my character that made me vulnerable to such treatment. There was nothing wrong with you, Nathaniel said, moving closer but not touching, respecting the boundaries she needed. The flaw was entirely in him. He sought out women in difficult circumstances because their vulnerability gave him power. It was never about you as an individual. It was about control. Vivian pressed her hands to her face, and when she spoke, her voice was muffled by her palms. Are they alive? The others? Yes, living in various states of seclusion, trying to survive the aftermath of what he did to them. I want to meet them. Nathaniel had not expected that response. Are you certain? Such a meeting would be difficult for all involved. I am certain of nothing except that I need to know I am not alone in this. Vivian lowered her hands, and her eyes were dry, but fierce. If there are others who survived him, I need to see them. I need to know that survival is possible. Within 2 days, Nathaniel had arranged meetings with all 3 women. Caroline Hendricks lived closest, in a small cottage on the edge of her family's former estate, which had been sold to satisfy creditors much as Vivian's father's property had been. She was 25, dark-haired and thin, with eyes that held the same haunted quality Nathaniel had seen in Vivian's gaze. When Vivian and Nathaniel arrived at her cottage, Caroline answered the door herself, her maid having gone to market. She stared at Nathaniel for a long moment, recognition and fear warring in her expression. "You are his brother," she said flatly. "I am," Nathaniel acknowledged. "I have come to offer reparation for what Philip did to you." "There is no reparation for what was done," Caroline replied, but she stepped aside to let them enter nonetheless. The cottage was small but clean, furnished with pieces that had clearly been salvaged from a larger home before it was sold. Caroline led them to a modest sitting room and offered tea with the mechanical politeness of someone going through the motions of propriety without feeling its weight. It was Vivienne who broke the awkward silence. "He hurt you." Caroline's teacup rattled against its saucer. She set it down carefully before meeting Vivian's eyes. "Yes." "For how long?" 11 months. From March of 1806 until February of 1807, when my family moved to Yorkshire. Distance was the only thing that saved me from him. Vivian nodded slowly. "He told me I was the only one. He said that what we had was special, unique, that he had never felt such passion for anyone else." A sound escaped Caroline's throat, something between a laugh and a sob. "He told me the same thing. He made me believe I was extraordinary, that he loved me beyond all reason. And then, when I finally gave in to his demands, when I allowed him to do what he wished, he told me I was a whore who had seduced him. That if I spoke of what happened, he would ensure everyone knew I had thrown myself at him. He kept journals," Vivian said softly, "documenting everything he did. To me, to you, to the others. His brother found them." Caroline's gaze shifted to Nathaniel, and he saw something shift in her expression. Not hope, precisely, but perhaps the faint stirring of something that might become hope if given time to grow. "What will you do with these journals?" she asked. "That depends," Nathaniel replied. "On what the women he harmed wish me to do. I can keep them hidden, protecting all of your reputations at the cost of allowing my brother's memory to remain untarnished. Or I can expose them, revealing the truth about what he was, though that exposure would inevitably bring scandal upon all of you." Caroline was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "I would like to meet the others first, before any decisions are made. If we are to face this, we should face it together." The meeting with Jane Morrison took place 3 days later in a private room at a respectable inn in a nearby market town. Jane was 23, blonde like Vivian but shorter, with a nervous manner that suggested she expected violence at any moment. She had been Philip's victim for 8 months before her father's death freed her to move away to live with relatives in Cornwall. Louisa Pemberley was the youngest at 21, and she had suffered the longest under Philip's attention. A full 16 months before his death ended her torment. She lived with her widowed mother in a small house that charity from distant relatives allowed them to maintain, and she bore visible scars on her arms that she made no effort to hide. When all 4 women sat together in that inn room, with Nathaniel standing guard at the door to ensure their privacy, something extraordinary happened. The silence that had been so heavy with individual shame began to lighten as they recognized in each other's faces their own pain, their own survival, their own stubborn refusal to be completely destroyed. "He told me it was my fault," Jane whispered, "that I had tempted him beyond endurance." "He said I was fortunate anyone would want me at all," Louisa added, "given my family's poverty. He made me believe I was worthless," Caroline said. "He tried to make us all believe we were worthless," Vivian finished. "But we are here. We survived him. That has to mean something." Nathaniel watched them find strength in their shared experience, watched them begin to speak more freely about what they had endured and how they had coped. When he finally offered each of them financial assistance, funds that would allow them independence and security, all 3 initially refused. We are not charity cases, Caroline said firmly. No, Nathaniel agreed. You are creditors, and I am attempting to pay a debt that my family owes. Philip destroyed parts of your lives. The least the Granville estate can do is provide resources to help rebuild what was taken. It was Vivian who convinced them in the end. Accept it, she told them. Not because you need charity, but because you deserve restitution. Take the money and use it to build lives where you need answer to no one, where you have the freedom to choose your own paths. One by one, they agreed. Nathaniel made arrangements to establish funds in each of their names, income-generating investments that would provide independence without requiring them to explain the source of their sudden good fortune. While Nathaniel was managing these financial arrangements, his investigator returned with new information. The man, a former Bow Street runner named James Crawford, had uncovered the location of Philip's correspondence. Letters that contained even more damning evidence than the journals. Lord Edmund Vance, Crawford reported, standing in Nathaniel's study with his hat in his hands. He was Mr. Philip's closest friend during the last years of his life. They maintained regular correspondence, and Lord Vance has these letters secured in a safe in his study. I could not gain access, but I have confirmed their existence through a housemaid who has seen him reading them. Nathaniel felt cold fury settle in his chest. Edmund Vance, a baron of modest holdings in neighboring Kent, had been Philip's companion at university and had remained close to him afterward. If Vance possessed letters documenting Philip's crimes and had said nothing, had done nothing, then he was complicit in those crimes. Thank you, Crawford, Nathaniel said, dismissing the investigator with payment for his services. Then he called for his carriage. He did not tell Vivienne where he was going. He simply left instructions with Mrs. Fletcher to ensure she remained at Ravenwood, and then he set out for Vance's estate, a small manor house called Thornbridge that sat on the border between Derbyshire and Kent. Lord Vance received him in a study lined with hunting trophies and filled with the stale smell of cigar smoke and brandy. He was a man of 32, running slightly to fat, with the florid complexion of someone who drank too much and exercised too little. Ravenwood. Vance greeted him with false bonhomie. What brings you to my humble home? My brother's letters, Nathaniel replied without preamble. I know you have them. I want them. Vance's expression shifted, calculation replacing the artificial warmth. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. Do not play games with me, Vance. Philip wrote to you about his activities, about the women he abused. Those letters are evidence of crimes, and I intend to have them. Even if such letters existed, Vance said carefully, why would I give them to you? So you can destroy them and protect the Granville name. So I can use them to ensure justice for his victims. Vance laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. Justice? For the daughters of bankrupt noblemen who threw themselves at your brother? Come now, Ravenwood. We both know how the world works. Those women were grateful for the attention, grateful for any help they could get. If things became a bit rough, well, that's the price one pays for charity. Nathaniel's control snapped. He crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed Vance by his cravat, slamming him back against the wall hard enough to rattle the hunting trophies. You knew, he hissed. You knew what he was doing and you said nothing. You are as guilty as he was. Vance struggled, his face turning purple. Assault me, and I'll have you before a magistrate. Duke or not, you cannot attack a peer in his own home. Try it, Nathaniel snarled. Bring a magistrate here and explain why you possess letters documenting systematic abuse of gentlewomen. Explain why you did nothing to stop it. He released Vance, who staggered backward, gasping for air. While Vance was still disoriented, Nathaniel moved to the desk where he had seen a ring of keys. He grabbed them and strode to the safe set into the wall behind a portrait. You cannot do this, Vance shouted, recovering enough to lunge toward him. Nathaniel turned and struck him, a single clean blow to the jaw that sent Vance sprawling across the carpet. Then he returned to the safe and began trying keys until one fit. The door swung open, revealing bundles of correspondence tied with string. He pulled them all out and began scanning them quickly, his stomach turning at what he read. Philip's letters were worse than the journals, more explicit, boasting about his conquests and describing in detail the methods he used to break his victims' spirits. There were dates, names, descriptions of acts that made Nathaniel want to destroy every piece of paper before him. But he did not destroy them. Instead, he pulled out a notebook from his coat and began copying the most damning passages as quickly as his hand could move. Vance groaned from the floor, but did not rise, still dazed from the blow. When Nathaniel had copied enough to serve as evidence, he replaced the original letters in the safe and locked it again. He tossed the keys onto Vance's chest and stood over him. "If you attempt to use those letters against the women my brother harmed," Nathaniel said quietly, "if you breathe a word about any of this to anyone, I will destroy you. I have copied enough to prove your knowledge of his crimes and your complicity in hiding them. The choice is yours. Silence or scandal that will end your position in society forever." Vance said nothing, but the hatred in his eyes spoke volumes. Nathaniel returned to Ravenwood with the copied letters burning like coals in his pocket. He found Vivian in the library reading by the fire, and when she looked up at his entrance, she saw immediately that something had changed. "What have you done?" she asked. He showed her the copies, explained about Lord Vance and the safe. As she read through the passages he had transcribed, he watched her face go pale, then red with fury. "These should be made public," she said finally. "Every word. Let the world know what kind of monster your brother was. That would destroy the Granville name," Nathaniel replied. "My family has held its title for 200 years. Exposure like this would taint it permanently." Vivian looked up at him, and her eyes were hard as diamonds. "Some names deserve to be tainted, Nathaniel. Some sins are too great to hide behind family honor." Nathaniel sank into the chair across from her, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. She was right. He knew she was right. But to deliberately destroy his family's reputation, to ensure that future generations would know the Granvilles as a family that had harbored a predator, it went against everything he had been taught about duty and honor. "If we do this," he said slowly, "there is no going back. The scandal will touch everyone. You, the other women, my tenants, everyone connected to the Granville name. We are already touched by scandal," Vivian countered. "The only question is whether we allow that scandal to be built on lies that blame the victims, or on truth that places responsibility where it belongs." They sat in silence for a long moment, the fire crackling between them, the weight of history and future pressing down on them both. "I will need to secure the women's futures first," Nathaniel said finally. "Ensure they have resources to weather whatever storm comes. And then, yes, we will expose the truth. All of it." Vivian nodded slowly, and something like respect entered her expression. "You surprise me, Your Grace. I did not think a duke would choose truth over convenience." "Neither did I," Nathaniel admitted. "But then I pulled you from a river, and everything I thought I understood about honor and duty began to look different." Over the following week, Nathaniel worked tirelessly to establish secure financial arrangements for all 4 women. He met with his solicitors, set up trusts that could not be easily challenged or seized, ensured that each victim would have independence regardless of what scandal might follow. And as he worked, as he planned for the storm to come, he found himself thinking not just about justice for the past, but about the future, about Vivian specifically, and the way she had begun to fill spaces in his life he had not known were empty, about how her smile, rare as it was, had become something he looked forward to seeing, about how the thought of her leaving Ravenwood left him hollow in ways he did not yet want to examine too closely. But there would be time for such considerations later. First, they had a truth to tell, and a reckoning to face. The Granville name would survive, or it would not. Either way, Nathaniel had chosen his path, and for the first time in months, that choice felt entirely right. The fortnight that followed brought an unexpected rhythm to Ravenwood Manor. Nathaniel and Vivian established a pattern of working together each evening in the library, cataloging the evidence from Philip's journals and the copied letters. The work was grueling, emotionally draining, requiring them to confront again and again the systematic cruelty that had been inflicted. Yet something else grew in those long hours surrounded by books and candlelight. They began to talk about other things, subjects unconnected to the darkness they were documenting. Vivian spoke of her childhood, of summers spent exploring the gardens of her father's estate before the money ran out. Nathaniel described Scotland, the wild beauty of the Highlands, and the fierce independence of the people there. One evening, as they worked through a particularly difficult passage in one of Philip's letters, Vivian set down her pen and pressed her hands to her face. "I cannot do this tonight," she said, her voice muffled. "I need to think about something else. Anything else. Or I shall go mad." Nathaniel immediately set aside his own work. "What would you prefer to think about?" She lowered her hands, and he saw exhaustion in her eyes, but also something else. A flicker of the person she had been before Philip destroyed her. Botany. "I used to spend hours studying plants, their properties, their uses. My father thought it frivolous at first, but I managed to develop a tincture that eased his gout, and after that he encouraged my studies. I had plans for a proper laboratory, for serious research, and then everything fell apart. The conservatory," Nathaniel said suddenly, standing. "Come with me." He led her through the darkened corridors of Ravenwood to the glass-walled room at the south end of the manor. Moonlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the space with silver light. The empty planters and abandoned workbenches looked almost mystical in that pale glow. Vivian moved into the space slowly, her fingers trailing along the weathered wood of the benches. "Your mother worked here. How did you know?" "The arrangement. The tools organized by function rather than display. This was a place of serious study." She turned to face him, and her expression held wonder mixed with longing. What did she research? Medicinal plants primarily. She believed that most ailments could be treated with proper botanical knowledge. The physicians thought her eccentric, but she cured more tenants of fever and infection than any of them managed with their leeches and purges. Vivian laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her face. "I would have liked to know her." "She would have liked you," Nathaniel replied, and realized it was true. His mother had valued intelligence and determination above social graces. She would have seen in Vivian what he himself was beginning to see, strength that had been tested beyond endurance and had somehow survived. "If you wished," he continued carefully, "you could use this space. The tools are old but serviceable. I could have the gardeners bring specimens." The hope that flared in Vivian's eyes was immediately suppressed. "I cannot stay long enough to justify such work." "Why not? You know why not. Every day I remain here compromises your position further." "Phew, what if I told you I no longer care about position?" Nathaniel moved closer, drawn by something he was not yet ready to name. "What if I said that these evenings working beside you have been the most meaningful hours I have spent in years?" Vivian's breath caught. "Nathaniel, you must not say such things." "Why not, if they are true?" Before she could answer, Mrs. Fletcher's voice called from the corridor, breaking the moment. "Your Grace, a message has arrived from Lady Pemberton." Nathaniel stepped back, allowing the distance propriety demanded. But as they left the conservatory, he noticed that Vivian's hand trembled slightly when she accepted his arm. The message from Lady Pemberton contained an invitation to the annual Spring Assembly, a ball held each March to welcome the new season. It was worded carefully, neither a direct invitation nor an explicit expectation. But Nathaniel understood its meaning. His presence would be noted if he attended, and equally noted if he did not. "You should go," Vivian said when he showed her the invitation the following morning. They stood in the morning room where pale sunlight streamed through the windows, making her golden hair shine. "Your absence will be remarked upon. Then let them remark," Nathaniel replied. "I will not leave you here alone. I am hardly alone. Mrs. Fletcher and the entire household staff are here." Nevertheless, Vivian's expression softened. "You have already sacrificed too much of your social standing for my sake. Go to the ball. Show society that the Duke of Ravenwood is not hiding in shame." "Are you trying to be rid of me for an evening?" Nathaniel asked, attempting lightness to mask the reluctance he felt at leaving her. "I am trying to preserve what remains of your reputation," she countered. "Please, Nathaniel. For me." He was preparing to argue further when the sound of carriages in the drive interrupted them. Multiple carriages, arriving without warning or appointment. Nathaniel moved to the window and felt cold dread settle in his chest. Lady Gwendolen had come to Ravenwood. She was not alone. A portly gentleman of perhaps 60 years emerged from the first carriage, dressed expensively but without taste, his waistcoat straining across his substantial middle. Mr. Cornelius Davenport, Nathaniel assumed. From the second carriage came a man in a magistrate's robes, his face sharp and calculating. Sir Gregory Thorne. Go upstairs, Nathaniel told Vivian urgently. Lock your door and do not come out until I send for you. But Vivian had gone pale, her eyes fixed on the arriving party. It is too late for that. They know I am here. My aunt would not have come otherwise. Bennet showed the visitors into the drawing room with obvious disapproval. Lady Gwendolen swept in as though she owned the manor, her eyes taking in every detail with predatory assessment. Mr. Davenport followed, wheezing slightly from the exertion of climbing the front steps. Sir Gregory Thorne brought up the rear, his expression neutral, but his eyes sharp. Your Grace, Lady Gwendolen said, offering a curtsy that managed to convey both respect and contempt. How kind of you to continue hosting my wayward niece. I have come to retrieve her. Lady Vivian is a guest in my home, Nathaniel replied coldly. She will leave only when she chooses to do so. I think not. Lady Gwendolen gestured to Mr. Davenport. This gentleman is Lady Vivian's legal betrothed. Their marriage contract was signed and witnessed months ago. I have come to ensure that contract is honored. Nathaniel moved to stand between Vivian and her tormentors. That contract was signed under duress and without Lady Vivian's true consent. The law does not recognize the consent of wards as necessary when guardians act in their best interests, Sir Gregory interjected smoothly. Lady Gwendolen, as Lady Vivian's guardian, had every right to arrange this marriage. The contract is legally binding. I have evidence, Nathaniel said, pulling the folded papers from his coat pocket, that proves Lady Gwendolen's complicity in crimes against her niece. These are copies of letters written by my late brother, documenting abuse that Lady Gwendolen not only permitted, but profited from. He handed the papers to Sir Gregory, watching as the magistrate's eyes scanned the damning words. For a moment, hope flared. Then Sir Gregory looked up, his expression unchanged. These are copies, Your Grace. Without the original documents, they hold no legal weight. Anyone could have written these and claimed they were penned by your brother. Lady Gwendolen smiled triumphantly. You see, Your Grace? You have nothing but unfounded accusations and forged evidence. Now, Vivian, collect your belongings. Mr. Davenport has been extraordinarily patient, but his patience has limits. Vivian's face had drained of all color. She swayed slightly, and Nathaniel reached out to steady her. Her arm beneath his hand was trembling. I will not go, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. You will, Mr. Davenport spoke for the first time, his voice high-pitched and nasal. The contract specifies that if you refuse to honor your commitment, I have the right to retrieve you by force if necessary. I would prefer not to involve constables, but I will if I must. You would not dare, Nathaniel said. Try me, Your Grace. Mr. Davenport's small eyes gleamed with malice. I have paid good money for this marriage. I will collect what is owed to me. Nathaniel felt Vivian begin to pull away from him, resignation settling over her features. She was preparing to surrender, to sacrifice herself to protect him from further scandal. No, he said sharply, pulling her back. There is another solution. What solution could you possibly offer? Lady Gwendolen demanded. Nathaniel turned to face Vivian fully, taking both her hands in his. Her eyes were wide with confusion and something that might have been hope. Marry me, he said. Right now, today. If you are my wife, their contract becomes void. Vivian's eyes widened in shock. Nathaniel, you cannot. You must not. I am not acting from pity. He interrupted, holding her gaze. These weeks of working beside you, of coming to know you, have shown me a woman of extraordinary courage and intelligence. A woman I would be honored to call my Duchess. This is absurd, Lady Gwendolen shrieked. You would marry shop-soiled goods to spite me? I would marry a remarkable woman because I choose to. Nathaniel replied, without looking away from Vivian's face. What say you, Vivian? Will you accept my proposal? Tears spilled down her cheeks. You are offering this from obligation, from guilt over your brother's crimes. That is not enough foundation for a marriage. Then what of respect? What of genuine admiration? What of the fact that I have not smiled this much in years until you came into my life? Before Vivian could answer, Lady Gwendolen's cruel laugh filled the room. How touching, but utterly pointless. The contract with Mr. Davenport takes precedence over any proposal you might make, Your Grace. She is legally bound to him. Nathaniel turned to Sir Gregory. Is that true? The magistrate examined the contract that Mr. Davenport had produced. I am afraid so, Your Grace. A pre-existing, legally binding betrothal contract cannot be superseded by a subsequent offer of marriage. The lady must honor her commitment to Mr. Davenport. The trap was complete. Nathaniel had offered everything, and it was not enough. Lady Gwendolen had won. Vivian pulled her hands free from Nathaniel's grasp, her face carefully blank in the way he had come to recognize as her protective armor. Then I will go with Mr. Davenport, she said quietly, each word falling like stones into still water. There is nothing more to be done. No, Nathaniel said, his voice sharp enough to make Sir Gregory look up from the contract. There must be another way. There is not, Lady Gwendolen said triumphantly. Now, Vivian, collect your belongings. Mr. Davenport's carriage awaits. But Nathaniel was thinking rapidly, his mind sorting through every piece of evidence he possessed, every detail of the past weeks. The copied letters, the journals, the testimonies of the other victims. Sir Gregory had dismissed the copies as inadmissible without originals, but what if the originals could be obtained? What if there were witnesses who could corroborate the contents? Wait, he said, raising his hand. Sir Gregory, you say the copies hold no legal weight. But what of witness testimony? If multiple persons could testify to the accuracy of these documents, to having seen the originals, would that not establish their validity? Sir Gregory frowned, clearly displeased at having his judgment questioned. That would depend on the credibility of the witnesses. Then I shall produce witnesses of unimpeachable character, Nathaniel replied. He turned to Bennet, who still stood at the door. Send Thomas to fetch Miss Caroline Hendricks, Miss Jane Morrison, and Miss Louisa Pemberley. Tell him it is urgent. You cannot delay this further, Mr. Davenport objected, his voice rising to an unpleasant pitch. I have traveled a considerable distance, and I will not be made to wait while you manufacture evidence. You will wait, Nathaniel said coldly, using the full weight of his ducal authority, or you will leave without Lady Vivian and lose everything you have already invested in this arrangement. The threat hung in the air. Mr. Davenport's face turned an alarming shade of purple, but he subsided, muttering under his breath about high-handed aristocrats. The wait for the other women seemed interminable. Nathaniel had Mrs. Fletcher show the unwelcome guests to a sitting room where they could wait in discomfort, while he remained with Vivian in the library. She stood at the window, looking out at the grounds, her shoulders rigid with tension. Why are you doing this? She asked without turning. You could let me go. Your obligation would be fulfilled. You could return to your life without the burden of my presence. Nathaniel crossed to stand beside her, close enough to see her reflection in the glass. Is that truly what you believe? That you are a burden? What else could I be? A remarkable woman, he said softly. A survivor of cruelties that would have destroyed most people. An intelligent, thoughtful person whose company I have come to value more than I can adequately express. Vivian finally turned to face him, tears streaking her cheeks. You speak of admiration, of respect, but admiration is not love, Nathaniel, and I do not deserve love. Not after everything that has been done to me. Everything I allowed to be done. Allowed? Nathaniel repeated, anger flaring on her behalf. You were trapped, manipulated, threatened. You did what you needed to do to survive. That is not allowance, Vivian. That is courage. I stopped fighting him, she whispered. After months of resisting, I simply stopped. I let him do what he wished because fighting made it worse. That is not courage. That is cowardice. Nathaniel took her hands again, holding them firmly when she tried to pull away. Survival is never cowardice. You endured what would have broken most people, and you are still here, still standing, still capable of caring about others despite everything you suffered. If that is not courage, then I do not know what is. Before Vivian could respond, Mrs. Fletcher appeared at the library door, her expression urgent. Your Grace, a message has just arrived from Miss Caroline Hendricks. She says it is of the utmost importance. Nathaniel took the sealed note and broke it open, his eyes scanning the hasty script. As he read, his jaw tightened. What is it? Vivian asked. Lord Vance? Nathaniel replied grimly. He is planning to attend Lady Pemberton's spring assembly tomorrow evening. Caroline has learned through her maid, who has a cousin in Vance's household, that he intends to make a public spectacle. He will use the original letters to claim that I knew of my brother's crimes and helped conceal them. He means to destroy my reputation before I can expose his complicity. Vivian's face paled. Then we have lost. He has the original documents, the very evidence we need. Not if I act first, Nathaniel said, his mind already forming a plan. If I go to the assembly tomorrow and expose Philip's crimes using the copies I have, if I bring forward all 4 of you to testify to their accuracy, Vance will have no choice but to confirm or deny. Either way, the truth will emerge. You would make us all targets of society's cruelty, Vivian said. The moment we speak publicly, our names will be ruined beyond redemption. Your names are already at risk, Nathaniel countered. Lady Gwendolen has ensured that. The question is whether the ruin will be built on lies that paint you as seductresses, or on truth that reveals you as victims. I would rather face honest scandal than dishonest respectability. A knock at the door interrupted them. Thomas had returned with the 3 other women, all looking confused and concerned at the urgent summons. Nathaniel quickly explained the situation, watching their faces as they absorbed the magnitude of what he was proposing. You want us to stand before all of society and admit what was done to us, Caroline said slowly, to expose ourselves to their judgment and their whispers. I want you to stand together and tell the truth, Nathaniel replied. Not because I have any right to ask it of you, but because it is the only way to ensure justice. Vance plans to twist the evidence to his own purposes. If we do nothing, he will succeed, and the narrative will be written by those who wish to protect Philip's memory at your expense. Jane, who had been silent until now, spoke up. And if we do this, if we expose ourselves and speak publicly, what then? Will we be believed? Or will we simply be adding public humiliation to private suffering? It was Vivian who answered. We will be believed by some and despised by others, but we will be heard. And perhaps if we stand together, we can show other women in similar circumstances that they are not alone, that survival is possible. Louisa nodded slowly. I am tired of hiding. I am tired of carrying shame that belongs to someone else. If there is even a chance that speaking out might prevent another woman from enduring what we endured, then yes, I will do it. One by one, the others agreed. Caroline with quiet determination, Jane with visible fear but firm resolve. They would go to the assembly together, all 4 victims unified in their testimony. We have this evening and tomorrow to prepare, Nathaniel said. We will rehearse what you will say, ensure you feel as confident as possible, and I will be there with you, lending whatever authority my position can provide. Over the hours that followed, they worked together in the library, crafting statements that were truthful, but not so explicit as to be unseemly. Each woman would speak briefly about her experience, corroborating the contents of the letters and journals, without descending into graphic detail. As evening fell, and the women prepared to return to their homes for the night, Vivian walked them to their carriages. When she returned, she found Nathaniel still in the library, staring at the copied letters spread across the desk. You are sacrificing everything for this, she said from the doorway. Your position, your reputation, your future standing in society. All for women you barely know, and a justice that may never be achieved. Nathaniel looked up, and in his amber eyes she saw something that made her breath catch. I am not sacrificing anything I wish to keep. What use is a position built on lies? What value is a reputation purchased with the suffering of the innocent? If society cannot accept truth, then society is not worth pleasing. And what of your future? Vivian asked softly. What of marriage, children, the continuation of your line? What of yours? Nathaniel countered. If you wed Davenport, you will spend your days in misery, producing heirs for a man you despise. Is that future worth preserving? It is the only future available to someone like me. No, Nathaniel said, rising and crossing to where she stood. It is the future your aunt and society have tried to force upon you. But there are other possibilities, if you are brave enough to reach for them. What possibilities could there be? Vivian whispered. Nathaniel took her hands, his grip warm and steady. Tomorrow, when we face society together, when we tell the truth regardless of consequence, we will demonstrate that there is another way to live. Not in hiding, not in shame, but in honesty. And after tomorrow, when the dust settles and we see what remains, perhaps we can build something new from the ruins. You still speak of marriage, Vivian said. even knowing that Sir Gregory declared the contract with Davenport binding. Contracts can be challenged. Laws can be questioned. Nothing is as immutable as it seems. He paused, then added quietly, and even if your legal situation cannot be immediately resolved, I would rather spend my life fighting alongside you than spend it in comfortable solitude. Vivian searched his face, looking for pity or obligation, and finding neither. What she saw instead was something that terrified her more than any threat her aunt could make. Genuine feeling, deep and growing, that had nothing to do with guilt or duty. I am afraid, she admitted. Afraid of hoping. Afraid of believing this might be possible. So am I, Nathaniel replied. But I have learned these past weeks that courage is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward despite it. The next evening, as the sun set over Derbyshire and the carriages began arriving at the Pemberton estate for the spring assembly, 2 vehicles made their way up the long drive in tandem. In the first, rode Nathaniel and Vivian. In the second, Caroline, Jane, and Louisa. They were dressed in their finest gowns, borrowed or altered from Ravenwood stores, their hair arranged with care, their faces set with determination. When they entered the ballroom together, the music did not stop precisely, but it faltered, conversations dying mid-sentence, as hundreds of eyes turned toward them. Lord Vance stood near the punch table, his expression shifting from surprise to fury as he realized what was happening. Lady Pemberton, a woman of 60 years with more sense than most of her peers, approached them with cautious courtesy. "Your Grace," she greeted Nathaniel, though her gaze flickered uncertainly to the women with him. "What an unexpected pleasure." "Lady Pemberton," Nathaniel replied, his voice carrying across the now silent ballroom. "I apologize for the disruption, but I have come tonight with a matter of grave importance that concerns this entire assembly. A matter of truth that has been hidden too long." The silence deepened, anticipation mixed with scandal-hungry eagerness. This was what society lived for: dramatic revelations and public spectacle. Nathaniel took a breath and began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," Nathaniel began, his voice carrying across the hushed ballroom with the authority of generations of ducal breeding. "I have come tonight to address a matter that has weighed upon my conscience since returning to England 6 months past. A matter concerning my late brother, Philip Granville, and the crimes he committed against innocent women during the years of my absence." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the servants standing along the walls ceased their movements, frozen in anticipation of scandal. Nathaniel continued, his gaze sweeping the assembled crowd, meeting eyes that quickly looked away. "My brother kept detailed journals documenting his activities. In these journals, he described a systematic campaign of abuse directed at young women from families that had suffered financial reversals, women who were vulnerable, and therefore, in his estimation, available for his amusement." A ripple of shocked whispers moved through the crowd. Lady Pemberton's hand flew to her throat, and several matrons began fanning themselves vigorously. "I have here copies of those journals," Nathaniel said, producing the folded papers from his coat, "as well as copies of letters he wrote to his confidant, Lord Edmund Vance, detailing his methods and his victims. These documents make for disturbing reading, but they are necessary to understand the full scope of what transpired." Lord Vance, who had been standing near the refreshment table, stepped forward, his face flushed with fury. "This is outrageous. You dare to besmirch the memory of your own brother with fabricated evidence? Everyone knows Philip was beloved by all who knew him. These women," he gestured dismissively toward Vivian and her companions, "are opportunists seeking to profit from tragedy." "Then you deny writing responses to the letters I have copied?" Nathaniel asked coolly. "You deny having in your possession the original correspondence documenting these crimes?" Vance's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. His silence was answer enough. Nathaniel turned back to address the assembly. "I present to you not only documentary evidence, but the testimony of the victims themselves. These 4 women standing with me tonight all suffered at my brother's hands. They have agreed to speak publicly, at great personal cost, to ensure that the truth is known." Caroline stepped forward first, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "My name is Caroline Hendricks. For 11 months in 1806 and 1807, I was subjected to systematic abuse by Philip Granville. He used my family's financial difficulties to coerce my compliance, threatening exposure and ruin if I spoke of what he did. I survived by moving to Yorkshire, distance being the only thing that saved me from him. The crowd's whispers grew louder. Several people began to edge toward the exits, but curiosity kept most rooted in place. Jane Morrison spoke next, her voice softer but no less determined. My name is Jane Morrison. For 8 months, I endured similar treatment. Mr. Granville convinced me that I had tempted him beyond endurance, that what happened was my fault. I believed him until I learned I was not alone in suffering his attentions. Louisa Pemberley followed, her scarred arms visible in her evening gloves. I am Louisa Pemberley, and I suffered the longest 16 months of torment that ended only with his death. He made me believe I was worthless, that no one else would ever want someone as damaged as I had become. Finally, Vivian stepped forward, and Nathaniel saw her gather every ounce of courage she possessed. I am Vivian Hartley, and for 14 months, I was victimized by Philip Granville with the full knowledge and consent of my aunt, Lady Gwendolen Fairmont, who accepted payment in exchange for allowing him access to me. The effect was explosive. The whispers became exclamations, shocked gasps, and expressions of outrage. Lady Gwendolen, who had entered the ballroom shortly before Nathaniel began speaking, attempted to slip toward the exit. Nathaniel moved quickly to block her path. Lady Gwendolen, he said, his voice cutting through the commotion. Would you care to address these accusations? She drew herself up, attempting dignity. These are lies, fabrications designed to extort money from me and to allow these women to prey upon your guilt. Then perhaps you can explain these, Nathaniel said, producing another set of papers. Receipts for payments made by my brother directly to you, dated consistently throughout the period of his abuse of your niece. The amounts are substantial and regular. What service did you provide to warrant such payments? Lady Gwendolen's face went white, then red. I provided hospitality when he visited. Nothing more. Hospitality, Caroline said, her voice ringing clear. That included listening to screams through thin walls and doing nothing. I know this because my own situation was similar. My guardian also accepted payment and also claimed ignorance. We were always present, Jane added. Our tormentors did not hide their actions from those who profited from them. They only hid from those who might object. Louisa stepped closer to Lady Gwendolen, and the older woman recoiled. You knew. Every woman whose guardian accepted money knew. You simply chose not to care because the money was more valuable than our suffering. The crowd had grown restless, divided between those who were horrified and those who were skeptical. An elderly gentleman, the Duke of Pembrokeshire, moved through the press of people to stand beside Nathaniel. I knew your father, Ravenwood, he said, his voice carrying despite his years. He was a man of unimpeachable honor. I see that honor has passed to you, though the method of its expression differs. To stand before society and expose family shame for the sake of justice requires courage I'm not certain I could muster. Thank you, Your Grace, Nathaniel replied, surprised by the support. But not everyone was swayed. Sir Gregory Thorne, the magistrate who had accompanied Lady Gwendolen to Ravenwood, stepped forward. These accusations are serious, but I must point out that we have only copies of documents and the testimony of women whose reputations are already compromised. Without the original documents, this evidence is questionable at best. Then let Lord Vance produce the originals, Nathaniel challenged. Let him show the Assembly the letters he has safeguarded for my brother. Unless, of course, he fears what those letters will reveal about his own complicity. All eyes turned to Lord Vance, who stood trapped by the weight of those stairs. His face had gone from red to ashen, and his hands trembled visibly. I do not have any such letters, he stammered. This is all a fabrication. Curious, Nathaniel said coldly. My investigator spoke with your housemaid, who has seen you reading them. Shall I summon her to testify? Vance's composure shattered. You have no right. Those letters were private correspondence between friends. They prove nothing, except that you knew, Nathaniel replied. You knew what he was doing, and you said nothing. You did nothing. That makes you complicit in every crime he committed. The crowd's murmur grew threatening. Several gentlemen began moving toward Vance, their expressions hard. He stumbled backward, looking desperately for an exit. It was then that Sir Gregory made his final mistake. Lady Gwendolen has done nothing wrong, he insisted. She provided for her niece out of charity. If the girl allowed herself to be compromised, that is hardly the fault of her guardian. If the girl allowed, Vivienne repeated, her voice shaking with fury. As though I had a choice. As though any woman has a choice when powerful men decide to take what they want. Caroline moved to stand beside her. We are not isolated incidents. We are a pattern. And the pattern shows systematic abuse enabled by those who should have protected us. Enabled and profited from, Jane added, her voice growing stronger. Lady Gwendolen was not the only guardian who accepted payment. There were others, and they should be held accountable. Nathaniel had not expected this development. He looked at the three women, seeing them find strength in their collective testimony, and realized that something larger was emerging from this confrontation than simple justice for Philip's crimes. I have established funds, Nathaniel announced, to provide financial independence for each of these women. It is a small gesture toward repairing damage that can never be fully undone, but I hope it will allow them to rebuild their lives free from the circumstances that made them vulnerable to predators. The Duke of Pembrokeshire nodded approvingly. A noble action, Ravenwood. You do credit to your title. Others began to murmur agreement, though many faces still showed doubt or disapproval. Society was dividing before Nathaniel's eyes, some drawn to the truth he had exposed, others retreating into comfortable denial. Lady Pemberton, who had remained silent throughout, finally spoke. I believe you, Your Grace. And I believe these brave women. Whatever scandal follows from tonight's revelations, it is better than continuing to pretend that such cruelties do not exist. Her support opened a floodgate. Several other ladies stepped forward to express similar sentiments, while their husbands stood awkwardly behind them, uncertain how to respond. But just as many couples began moving toward the exits, their faces set in expressions of outraged propriety. Sir Gregory, seeing his own position becoming precarious, attempted one final defense. This is highly irregular. These matters should be brought before proper authorities, not aired as public spectacle. Then why have you not brought them before proper authorities? Nathaniel countered. You have had evidence of Lady Gwendolen's involvement. You have heard testimony tonight. Yet you defend her and question the victims. One might wonder why a magistrate would be so determined to protect someone accused of such crimes. He let the implication hang in the air, and saw understanding dawn on several faces. Sir Gregory had not simply been accompanying Lady Gwendolen as her magistrate. He had been complicit in protecting her, which suggested his own involvement in similar arrangements. I have done nothing wrong, Sir Gregory blustered, but his voice lacked conviction. 3 cases, Nathaniel said quietly. 3 instances of bribery that my investigator uncovered in your judicial history. Would you like me to detail them publicly, or will you quietly withdraw your defense of Lady Gwendolen? Sir Gregory's face went gray. Without another word, he turned and pushed through the crowd toward the exit. Lady Gwendolen, abandoned by her defender, stood alone in the center of the ballroom. She looked at Vivienne with undisguised hatred. You have destroyed me, she hissed. I hope you are satisfied. No, Vivienne replied. You destroyed yourself. I am simply refusing to be destroyed with you. As Lady Gwendolen fled the ballroom, the crowd's tension finally broke. Some guests approached Nathaniel and the women to offer support and express their horror at what had been revealed. Others left in disgust, unwilling to associate with such scandal. The assembly had become a battleground, and the battle had divided society itself. When the evening finally ended, and they returned to Ravenwood in the pre-dawn darkness, Nathaniel felt exhausted, but strangely lightened. The truth was out. Society knew what Philip had been, and while many would never accept it, enough had heard and believed to make a difference. Vivienne sat beside him in the carriage, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Thank you, she said softly. For everything. Thank you, Nathaniel replied. For being brave enough to speak. You changed lives tonight. Not just your own, but every woman who heard you and realized she was not alone. Outside, dawn was breaking over Derbyshire, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. A new day was beginning, and with it, perhaps, a new world. The weeks following the spring assembly brought consequences that rippled through Derbyshire society like stones cast into still water. Lady Gwendolen Fairmont, stripped of her veneer of respectability, found herself shunned by the very circles she had once commanded. Her financial situation, already precarious, collapsed entirely when it became known that she had profited from her niece's abuse. Within a fortnight, she was forced to sell her manor and retreat to a small cottage in Cornwall, far from the society that had turned its back on her. Lord Edmund Vance fared little better. Parliament launched an investigation into his knowledge of Philip's crimes and his failure to report them. While criminal charges were never formally brought, the scandal destroyed his social standing. He withdrew to his estate in Kent, rarely venturing beyond its boundaries, a ghost of the confident man who had once boasted of his friendship with a duke's son. Sir Gregory Thorne lost his position as magistrate when Nathaniel's investigator presented evidence of 3 previous instances of accepting bribes to overlook crimes committed by wealthy men against vulnerable women. The revelation shocked no one who had been paying attention, but it provided the legal justification needed to remove him from office. Perhaps most surprising was Mr. Cornelius Davenport's response to the revelations. 3 days after the assembly, he appeared at Ravenwood unannounced, his portly figure seeming somehow diminished. Nathaniel received him in the study, prepared for confrontation. "Your Grace," Davenport began without preamble, "I have come to dissolve the marriage contract with Lady Vivian. I was told she was a willing participant in an advantageous arrangement. Had I known the true circumstances, I would never have agreed to such a match." Nathaniel studied the man carefully, searching for deception, and finding only weary honesty. "You were deceived by Lady Gwendolen." "Thoroughly," Davenport admitted. "I am not a cruel man, Your Grace. Merely a practical one. I sought a wife to manage my household and bear me heirs. I did not seek to compound the suffering of an already traumatized young woman." He produced a legal document from his coat. "The contract is hereby voided. I require only the return of the advance I paid to Lady Gwendolen. That will be arranged immediately," Nathaniel replied, feeling unexpected respect for the merchant. "Thank you for your understanding in this matter." After Davenport departed, Nathaniel found Vivian in the conservatory, where she spent most of her days now. The space had been transformed over the preceding weeks. The glass panes had been cleaned until they sparkled, the workbenches repaired and organized, and dozens of specimens brought from the grounds and arranged in careful rows. Vivian stood among them, her hands stained with soil, her face more peaceful than Nathaniel had ever seen it. "Mr. Davenport has released you from the contract," he said without preamble. Vivian's hands stilled in their work. "Truly? Truly. You are free, Vivian. Legally and completely free." She set down the plant she had been examining and turned to face him, tears gathering in her eyes. "I do not know what to do with freedom. I have never had it before." Nathaniel moved closer, drawn as always by her presence. "Then perhaps we might discover it together. Nathaniel, I cannot ask you to continue sacrificing for me. The contract is voided. I can leave without bringing you further scandal." "Do you wish to leave?" he asked, and found himself holding his breath while waiting for her answer. "No," she whispered, "but what I wish and what is wise are often different things." "Then let us be foolish together," Nathaniel said, taking her soil-stained hands in his. "Vivian, these weeks of working beside you, watching you reclaim yourself, have shown me something I did not expect to find. I have come to care for you, not from obligation or guilt, but from genuine feeling. You have become essential to me in ways I cannot adequately express. Society will never fully accept us," Vivian said, though hope flickered in her eyes. "Half the county has already turned their backs on you because of your association with me. Then I have no use for that half," Nathaniel replied. "The other half, those who value truth over comfortable lies, those are the people I wish to know. And if that means spending my life among a smaller circle of genuine friends, rather than a large assembly of hypocrites, I will count it as a gain rather than a loss. You speak of caring for me," Vivian said carefully. "But caring is not the same as love." Nathaniel smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his features. "Are you asking me to declare myself, Lady Vivian? I am asking you to be honest about what this is. If it is companionship you seek, partnership in work, I can provide that. But if you imagine that I can ever be a proper duchess, can ever navigate society with grace and confidence, you will be disappointed. I do not want a proper duchess," Nathaniel said firmly. "I want you, the woman who survived what would have destroyed others, the woman who speaks truth even when silence would be safer, the woman who makes me smile simply by existing in my space. If that is not love, then I do not know what is." Vivian's tears spilled over, but she was smiling through them. Then yes, if you are certain this is what you want, yes, I will marry you. I have one condition, Nathaniel said, and saw worry flash across her face. That we take this slowly. That we give you time to grow accustomed to the idea of marriage without the shadow of coercion hanging over it. I do not wish you to wake one morning and realize you have traded one cage for another. That is your condition? Vivian asked, wonder in her voice. That we go slowly for my benefit? Yes. Is that acceptable? She laughed, that rusty sound that was becoming more musical with each passing day. More than acceptable. Thank you, Nathaniel, for understanding. They were married 6 weeks later in the small chapel on the Ravenwood estate. The ceremony was intimate, attended only by those who had proven themselves true friends. Caroline, Jane, and Louisa sat in the front pew alongside Mrs. Fletcher, who wept openly throughout the service. The Duke of Pembrokeshire served as witness, lending his consequence to the union, despite the scandal attached to it. Vivian wore a simple gown of cream silk, her golden hair crowned with flowers from the conservatory she had restored. Nathaniel, watching her walk toward him down the chapel aisle, felt something in his chest expand and settle simultaneously, as though a piece of himself he had not known was missing had finally found its place. 2 years passed with the gentle inevitability of seasons changing. Vivian published her treatise on medicinal botany, a work that was initially dismissed by the male-dominated scientific establishment, but gradually gained recognition for its thoroughness and insight. Nathaniel threw himself into legal reform, working with sympathetic members of Parliament to strengthen protections for women whose families had fallen into debt. Their daughter arrived on a clear autumn morning, tiny and perfect, with her mother's golden hair and her father's amber eyes. They named her Margaret, after Nathaniel's mother, and she became the living symbol of their determination to build something good from the ruins Philip had left behind. Society never fully embraced them. There were always whispers, always those who believed the worst, and refused to be swayed by evidence. But they found their community among those who valued substance over scandal, truth over tradition. Caroline married a country doctor and became a prominent advocate for women's medical education. Jane opened a school for girls whose families could not afford traditional academies. Louisa became a writer, publishing novels that explored themes of survival and redemption. On quiet evenings, Nathaniel and Vivian would sit together in the conservatory, now a thriving space full of growing things, and marvel at the journey that had brought them from a river's edge to this moment of peace. The scars remained, both visible and invisible, but they had learned that healing was not about erasing the past. It was about building a future that acknowledged pain while refusing to be defined by it. Dear listener, as you hear this story in the quiet of your own space, perhaps you find yourself thinking about the rivers in your own life, the moments when you stood at the edge and wondered whether survival was possible. Know this: courage is not the absence of fear or pain. It is the choice to continue despite them. Vivian found her strength not in forgetting what had been done to her, but in refusing to let it determine who she would become. Nathaniel discovered that honor sometimes requires destroying what is comfortable to build what is right. And perhaps, in your own time, you will find that truth, though costly, is worth the price. That love built on genuine respect survives longer than attraction built on convenience. That healing takes time, patience, and the courage to hope, when hope seems foolish. May you find your own Ravenwood, your own conservatory full of growing things. May you discover that even the deepest scars can fade with time and care. And may you always remember that survival, in itself, is victory. Sleep peacefully, knowing that tomorrow offers possibilities today cannot yet imagine.